So as a violinist, he began studying violin in Romania, which is where he was born and grew up. He went on to graduate from Julliard. He's been featured on radio, CBC, as well as in Europe, and he's received great accolades by the media across the country. He also performed with the University of Calgary String Quartet, and they're quite an active group. They recently finished the entire Beethoven quartet cycle, and they still had a little bit of energy left over, so I think they've moved on to Shostakovich after that. He's performed and led many different ensembles in Calgary and internationally, including the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra. Most recently, he's been leading an ensemble called the Calgary Musicscapes Band, and they've been exposing Calgary audiences to folk music from all around the world. If you want to hear some very energetic and enjoyable folk music, I recommend looking up the Calgary Musicscapes Band on YouTube, and you'll find a performance you'll enjoy very much. He also conducts the University of Calgary Symphony Orchestra and the Calgary Youth Orchestra, and he's taken the Calgary Youth Orchestra to Europe on a number of trips, and again, they get great reviews whenever they go. In terms of being a violin teacher, he's been teaching with the University of Calgary and Mount Royal Conservatory since 1991, and so of course, having been teaching for that long in Calgary, he's got countless students that have gone on to successful music careers, and that is certainly in no small part due to his excellent mentorship. Now, of course, I could spend the entire PL Talks describing Edmond's various achievements and contributions, but I think it would be better to hear from Edmond himself, so please join me in welcoming Edmond to PL Talks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being here. I'll just start saying a few things about what we just played. That's an example of klezmer music. And for those of you who don't know what klezmer music is Jewish music from Eastern Europe. The word klezmer comes from two Hebrew words. One is kli, which means tool. The other one is zemer, which means to make music. So klezmer music, of course, was popular at weddings. And for dancing, for processionals, and one of the rhythms that you heard, which is very common in klezmer music, is tam, pa, 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 pa. So I gave the viola part all those rhythms, and I kept the tune. No, I did give you the tune for 8 measures. But anyhow, it's fun music to play, and it's music that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was really interesting. Recently, we performed, a slow sort of klezmer piece it's kind of like a dirge almost, pam, pam, pam. And I was, it was a wedding actually, processional, and I was saying to the audience, well, it's kind of it could be kind of a sad thing, you get married and you leave your parents, and everybody started laughing. Like I said, the most ridiculous thing, I guess. Nobody is unhappy to leave their parents. And I thought, well, I guess it is kind of a foreign concept to be happy about leaving your parents in modern times. But if you think back in the olden days, you're a young girl of 17, 18, all of a sudden you're going to go live with your mother-in-law who's going to boss you around, tell you when to do things, how to do things. They didn't have washing machines then. You'd have to, with children, no disposable diapers either. You'd have to do laundry like every day, hand washing. I mean, that would make me miserable if I knew what was waiting for me after I left my parents' house. So I think it was just, and the same with the groom. You couldn't just go out and rent an apartment and, start a 9-to-5 job. I mean, it was difficult in these villages, in these what they were called shtetls, to actually start a new life with a family and what have you. So there was always this kind of sadness. A lot of the wedding tunes actually have a sort of a sadness to them, a tenderness to them, And parents were held in high esteem, and people just didn't enjoy leaving their parents just the way we do now, you know. So anyhow, and so this tune was Hava Nagila, as you know, which means let us rejoice, and it's a Hasidic tune. The Hasids, it's a sort of a mystic sect of the Jewish faith. It came around in the 18th century as a sort of a counter movement to the Jewish Enlightenment, which was called the Haskalah, which sort of advocated for secular studies, for integrating into European societies, for studying the Torah from a sort of textual analysis. The Hasids wanted to sort of connect with God through sort of a spiritual, more kind of a mystic way. So the services for sort of Hasidic Jews involve a lot of singing, wordless singing, a lot of dancing. They can go on for hours. And Hava Nagila is one of those Hasidic tunes that used to be sang, you know, a lot slower. And all these tunes and dancing that can go on and on basically leads to this sort of state of ecstasy almost, this sort of almost a trance state. And they call that voikus, which is sort of connection with God. So it's very expressive music. And what's interesting is that what gives this music a lot of its expressive power is the sort of modal scale. The klezmer music borrowed modal scales from the cantorial chants that was in Jewish prayers. And one of the most, for example, the Hava Nagila is based on a mode called the Hava Rabbah, which means abounding love. And another another common mode is Mishabarak, which means he who is blessed. But of course, these modes were all over the Balkans, Middle East. The same Hava Rabbah mode is called Hijaz in Turkish, Hijaz in Greek music. So there was a lot of exchange of sort of musical modes, musical scales. So that's where sort of this klezmer music started. And then what happened, there were a lot of pogroms and persecution in Eastern Europe of Jews towards the end of the 19th century. And so between 1890 and 1920s, 2 million Jews immigrated to the United States. And of course, among them, there were quite a few klezmer musicians. Some names I'll throw around. Abe Schwartz was a violinist from Romania. David Taras was a Ukrainian clarinetist. Naftul Brendwein was a Polish clarinetist. And so they recorded all this music, and thank God that they did, because the Holocaust essentially decimated the Jewish population in Eastern Europe, including klezmer players. And all this music was transmitted orally. It was not written down. So a lot of klezmer music actually disappeared because the klezmer musicians perished. So the only klezmer music that survived is the music that the previous immigrants to the United States recorded in the 1920s and 30s. And so there were those recordings. It sort of went dormant till the 1970s. In the US, because of the bicentennial celebrations of the bicentennial of the American Declaration of Independence, all of a sudden there was interest in all these communities and their cultural roots. So the Jewish community sort of started digging into their cultural roots, and they found all these old recordings on old tapes, and they transcribed them. Excuse me. And then that was the decade when Fiddler on the Roof came out. So there was a lot of interest in klezmer music and music of other cultures too, and so it was just a big celebration. And ever since then, it's been a very sort of popular music that's been taken up all over the world. So,
and obviously, klezmer music is very important. You know a lot about the history. You perform it a lot. What is it that connects you to klezmer music?
Well, I was born in Constanța, which is a port city in Romania. It goes back over 2,000 years. During Roman times, it was called Tomis. There are still Roman ruins there. North of Constanța, there are Greek ruins. So you had large Jewish community, Armenian community, Turkish community, Greek community. I mean, it was just a real, all those seaports were, so it was kind of in the air, all that music.
It was something you grew up with.
And you heard, and it has so many similarities to other folk music. Because it's interesting, I mean, Jewish musicians, along with Romani musicians, and by Romani I mean gypsy musicians, there was a period in Russia in the 19th century where the only ones who were allowed to play at weddings and taverns were Jews and Romani musicians, because it was considered sort of lowbrow, kind of inferior music, and that was, what they were allowed to do. The Gentiles were doing the sort of classical music, right? So there was a lot of, of course, these musicians, when they played for a Russian wedding or other type of, they played Russian music, or they played whatever, they were asked to play. So they learned, music of all sorts of different, ethnic cultures. And therefore, these musicians, these gypsy musicians, they could play anything. They could play Hungarian tunes, they could play Russian tunes, they could play Romanian tunes, they could play anything. Yeah. So it was very closely connected, music community.
Yeah, well, you've put a big focus on various kinds of folk music yourself for various ensembles. So I know one of the big ones was you had put together a concert of Ukrainian music for the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra. So how did you find the experience of working with this folk music with the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra players?
Well, I told Ian that I don't get nervous very often, but that was a nightmarish situation because I'm just kind of a part-time composer. So I wrote these two big suites, Ukrainian suites based on Ukrainian folk songs. And it just didn't dawn on me. It was just sort of a, a regular experience till I got on the podium and I just had this knot in the pit of my stomach and I was thinking, oh my God, how if they hate it? They'll stand up and walk away and just say, we're not going to play this crap. And I thought, what am I going to do? And then I immediately, I thought, hold on a second, I've heard them play worse crap than what I wrote. So I immediately felt better, Songs like, I don't know, hey bartender, there's a big bug in my beer, You know that one? No, you don't. See, how does it go? Yes, how does it go after? Yeah, he's got one eye red, the other one blue. What's that? He's got one eye red, the other one blue. He's drinking all my brew, something like that, So anyhow, I don't think the CPO did that one in particular, but they've done songs like that musicians will play, and I've had experiences like that, and of course it came off well and was just great. But I've had experiences like that where you go and I was asked to conduct a Rita McNeil concert, and I just never took to her music, and I remember when she had this show on CBC, I couldn't change the channel fast enough every time and all of a sudden I'm supposed to conduct a concert with her, so I went and bought all her CDs and I listened to every CD that Rita McNeil recorded, and I memorized the entire program and did a very good job, I thought. And so if anybody wants free Rita McNeil CDs, you're welcome to them, because anyhow, I had to learn to like it, and I had to, just see the value of the music, what I can do with the music, and internalize it. So it's not something that I would do just because I had to, but really internalize it. And so it's kind of an experience that it doesn't really prepare you when you go to school for these kind of experience. And I'll mention another one where I had. The Calgary Stampede wanted to have the CPO for their heavy horse show. So they came to me to conduct that. Uh-huh. And so I met with this rancher, and he said, yeah, I want you guys to play music that the horses would like. So I went home and I thought, wow, if I were a horse, what kind of music would I like? And, So, and I thought, well, yeah, I mean, really, if you think of it, if you're a horse, what kind of music would you like? You've got 4 legs, so that's a start. So I thought, okay, well, I better not program anything in triple meter because they might trip over each other, and then I'll cause something. So anyhow, so I picked music that I thought the horses would like, and boy, everybody was really happy, and I hope the horses were happy too, because but it's something they don't teach you at Julliard, right? How to pick music.
No, I don't suppose they do. Okay, one of the other ensembles that you've worked with a lot is the Calgary Youth Orchestra. And you've told me you've taken them on these trips to Europe, and you try and take them to locations where they would get to see the environment of where the composers actually grew up to. So what was it that you're hoping that the students would get out of these trips, out of these experiences?
Well, we do a lot of music that I think young people have a difficult time deeply connecting with it. And it's not their fault. It's just sort of in the modern environment. We are playing music by Mozart, by Haydn. So, in a rehearsal, I'd be talking about the elegance of a Mozart minuet or the gracefulness. And they look at me like, and if you walk around Calgary, I mean, how many elegant, graceful buildings, architecture are there? I mean, it's just, where you go to Europe and you go in front of Versailles or Schönbrunn Palace, you go through those interiors, you see those paintings, those frames, those chandeliers. I mean, and, I had students come to me afterwards, oh, now I know what you mean by elegance and gracefulness. And, it just was just kind of something we just kind of, just play the notes again and hopefully you won't complain. But, it's such a refined playing to be able to capture something like gracefulness or elegance. Those are very difficult things to capture in music because you can capture bombastic stuff. But to capture something as delicate as that is very difficult. And also, kids find it boring, because we don't really have an appreciation the way the people in the Rococo era and what have you had, like painters like Fragonard and what have you, of elegance, of gracefulness. So it's something alien. And to be able to sort of immerse them, to take them to Versailles and play a piece by Lully and say, yes, this is sort of where it would have been played. We went to Schönbrunn Palace and we played in the hall where Mozart performed, and we played Mozart. And, so you have that kind of a feeling of, it's kind of a pilgrimage. And so that works, really well for that music, but it also worked well for other kind of music. When we were in Spain, we played some Spanish music. It takes some nerve to take a youth orchestra from Cowtown and go to Spain and play Spanish music for the people there, and I always, cringe a little bit, or I'm worried a little bit that they're just going to go, who do they think they are? In Spain, we had somebody in the audience after the concert saying, that's how Spanish music should be played. It was just, we had, a kid who spoke Spanish, and she said, yeah, that's what this audience member said, So it was just great. If you play it well, people will appreciate it. And I try to connect the music that we play to the places we visit. And then, I just bumped into a CYO alumnus here, Alex Willard, and he reminded me he was on the Germany tour. And of course, Germany tour, we started in Berlin. We went to the Jewish Museum, which has a large section on Felix Mendelssohn's grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, who was one of the philosophers behind the Enlightenment. Then we went to Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam, where there's sort of famous painting of King Frederick II playing flute with Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach playing the harpsichord. And that room is exactly the same now as it was back in the 1720s, And so you're playing that music and you see the room and you can almost put yourself into the painting. Then what did we do after that? We went to Weimar, where we visited Liszt's house, and one of the pieces we were playing was Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, and that's where he wrote it, and they have his piano there. You can play Liszt's piano, and so that kind of, and then even the dark side of things. One of the pieces I took on the Germany tour was a piece by Erwin Schulhoff, who's a Jewish Czech composer who died in one of the concentration camps in Bavaria. So we went to the Dachau concentration camp. So, you know, there were those kind of connections. We went, Leipzig. We went to see Mendelssohn's house where he was born, where he worked. Then we went to the church that his family belonged to, and we played a movement of his Reformation Symphony based on a Lutheran hymn. You know, I mean, so those connections really hit home. And then, of course, another trip that that I remember that was significant was a trip to France. One of the hard things to teach kids is about Impressionism, because it's such a sort of vague idea. I mean, even for adults, it's difficult. But sort of impressionistic sensibilities are really hard to get to. And so you go to France, you go to Honfleur, and you sort of witness that light and that surrounding. And, you know, some art historians call that the birthplace of Impressionism. We went to Rouen and saw the cathedral, and before that we looked at all the Monet's paintings. We went to Giverny, and then we saw his paintings of the lilacs in Musée d'Orangerie. You know, so there was that kind of connection, and then he connected with sort of Debussy and Ravel and all those. So it's always, and in Spain we went to these caverns when they had, you know, really traditional flamenco dancers just in your face, because they're basically like caves. And I mean, the power and it was just so immediate. So it really makes a difference, you know, experiencing that firsthand.
Yeah, well, that's a great opportunity for the students. And so I know a big part of what you've done, and I think what's a big part of your contribution to the community locally and even nationally, internationally, is teaching. You've had students that have moved on to play with the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra, play in Ottawa, play around the world. And you're saying to me that it's really important for someone who teaches violin to not just know how to perform, but they also have to know about violin pedagogy. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I've sort of learned as I age that in many ways there's kind of a faulty attitude towards, that kind of creeps up in teaching, is that you are teaching people to be performers, which is basically why they come to you. You know, you want to be sort of better performers. And then the ones who are, let's say, you know, U of C composition majors or theory majors, what have you, their principal instrument is violin, but, you know, you don't, well, I mean, you still teach them, but somehow you sort of teach them whatever they can handle, because they're not violin majors. And then I realized that a lot of these composers and music historians, what they do after they graduate, they become teachers. And you go, oh no, you know, I mean, I didn't teach them anything. Or, you know, I didn't teach them how to teach. And that's different from teaching somebody how to play the instrument. And in many ways, you know, I remember thinking, well, what's more important in a sort of from a social perspective? You know, if you are going to if you're going to have a violinist in an orchestra play a few wrong notes now and then, you know, for a career of 40 years or 50 years, or is it to have a really mediocre, inferior teacher who's going to teach hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young children for the next 50 years? And, you know, it's like, wow, all of a sudden, you know, the teachers, you know, outweigh the responsibility of teaching somebody how to teach, almost outweighs somebody, you know, the responsibility of teaching somebody how to perform. Because all they'll do is just they'll entertain a little less perfectly. But, you know, with teaching, there's so much more responsibility. So I've shifted my focus, you know, in teaching a lot of students, and even, you know, violinists who plan to go into performance, shifting my focus towards more pedagogy, and make sure that once they graduate, they have some sort of pedagogical skills, because so many of them are going to end up teaching, right, even if they don't know that yet.
Yeah,
you know.
Absolutely. So, right. Well, and there's one thing that you mentioned to me that surprised me, and I think probably some of your students would be interested to hear this, which is when you're such an accomplished performer as you are, but you still feel like you have to practice. So why do you feel like you still have to practice? I would think you've got it all together. You wouldn't have to.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's like I was, you know, I don't know, sort of like the big tennis, the U.S. Open with Serena Williams and Bianca Andreescu, right? Serena Williams has to train as hard as Bianca Andreescu, right? I mean, she's close to 40 maybe, or what have you, and Bianca is 19. And in fact, I think when you're older, I think you have to train even more and more carefully than when you're in your teens, where maybe the body can take a little bit more abuse. But to have the supple motions and the reactions in the fingers, I mean, you just never. So I tell my students, the only thing that differentiates my understanding of practicing now is that I know what I cannot get away with. When I was in my 20s, I was trying, if I could get away with just this much practicing, and then you find out, oh no, I can't get away with it because, something falls apart. So now I know what it takes for me to feel comfortable with a performance. Right. And it's usually that I have to get sick of the piece. If I am not sick of the piece, then that means I haven't practiced it enough.
Right. Well, I think we've got a couple minutes. Does anyone have any questions for Edmond? We've got a question in the back there.
What's your favorite piece to play?
That's a tough one.
What's your favorite piece to play?
Depends if it's morning, afternoon, evening. It depends if I've had a few drinks or not. It really does, because I enjoy all composers, and there's beauty in all music, and it really depends. I love these folk arrangements, and I played with a Greek band as sort of was a CBC project that they put together of a sort of a classical violinist who also did some folk music with this Greek band, Rembetika Hipsters, and it's a Calgary band, and was supposed to be kind of just see what happens. And we had a concert, and then at the end of the concert I was asked, well, what was the biggest difference playing with a sort of folk band? And I said, well, the biggest difference was that the first time I was sober was at the concert. I mean, every time I went for a rehearsal, they'd have the Retsina, they'd have all the Metaxa, and they'd have so you get into that kind of. And you are making great music, and then at that point, that's the most enjoyable thing that you can do. You can't do that with Beethoven. You can't drink Metaxa and play Beethoven. I mean, so it's. I mean, I love romantic composers, but I find Bach and Baroque composers really meaningful and soothing and cathartic almost, and deep and profound. And then, modern music, I mean, all the angst, we just finished the Bartok string quartet cycle, and it's just powerful, music with, some of it is just really almost violent in nature. And so they're just, and that's when you program, you have a concert, you try and get the pieces to lead nicely from one to another. But you have to enjoy all of them. And sometimes you're asked to play something, as I said about Rita McNeil, that you might not enjoy the whole thing. But it's kind of like, being a used car salesman. The motor might not be great, but look how good it looks, And so you focus on how good the car looks. Or it's got a nice stereo inside. Why do you need a motor for? So sometimes, I do have to take that approach with music that I might have to play, and there are certain things I like about it and certain things I don't.
Well, I would think any music that you play, you make it look good, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, again, you have to internalize it. You have to take ownership of it. You have to, just like an actor, you have to be in character. And just because you don't like the character, you can't show that.
Right. Well, I think we have time for one more question.
I've always wanted to play the violin, and I understand it's a very difficult instrument probably one of the more difficult ones. Is there kind of an age where you probably shouldn't even go there?
No, I mean, there are such things as silent violins now, so actually nobody has to hear it, including yourself. So the short answer, no. I mean, you can pick up violin at any point. It's refined movement. And actually, I'm only half kidding about the silent violins, because you can adjust the volume, and you can practice things so that they don't bother you and they're not irritating. I mean, it's you know, and that actually that can make a difference. You actually can hang on to it a little bit longer than if you just hear it scratching all the time and squeaking and what have you. So.
Other than the silent violin, do you have any advice for young performers starting out or old ones picking up the new instrument?
Well, it's, you know, one of the challenges in North America is that a violin teacher is supposed to, you know, is responsible for teaching theory, you know, teaching rudimentary, you know, music and violin. And it's very difficult in other countries, in Romania, for example, the way you had separate theory lessons, rudiments, and then violin lessons or violin lessons. But, you know, here, you know, and it's tough because parents, you know, they pay for, you know, 2 months of lessons and they want little Johnny to be able to play the violin at the end of 2 months. So then a lot of times, you know, teachers have to rush through things because, you know, you have to show something. And some instruments are easier to play, you know, with little time. For example, I remember picking up a clarinet. Within 2 hours, actually, I could play O Canada. I mean, you can't do that on a violin. So rushing the initial stages is an issue in teaching because teachers have to show something. And so a lot of times the setup, because it's such an awkward setup, you know, the setup suffers. But these days, you know, you can buy these kind of bow rights, which is basically this kind of frame that you put the bow in so it keeps your bow straight. You can buy all sorts of things for the violin that, you know, you can mark where the pitches are. And I, you know, the other thing that I actually found with certain kind of electric violins is they don't have that shoulder. So what happens is it's actually easier to go up and down in sort of in higher positions because you don't have to strain yourself to get around the shoulder. You know, making it, I think having group sort of activities is great for kids because they see others who are struggling through the same, you know, problems, and it gives them sort of a way to sort of, you know, just have friends who have similar interests. So I think that's important also. Yeah. But yeah, having, you know, the first few, because so much of the time I spent fixing things that were just, you know, the foundation was set wrong or just not very efficient with lots of tension, strange things, and then it has to be fixed to get to the next level. So.
So did I see a question over here? No?
I can ask.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, of course.
So, what age is the good age to start?
Well, I think when these knuckles have a little bit more tension and there's a little bit of muscle control, I think it's too early if the fingers are just so wobbly that there's no way you can keep sort of the integrity of the hand position. You know, so that kind of depends. And the same with the bow because you need a little bit of firmness in the knuckles, in the fingers. And if it's, you know, if the kid is 4 years old and doesn't have that, or 5, you know, usually by around 5 or 6, you know, there's a little bit of firmness and a little bit of you know, ability to hold a shape in you know, for while playing. So.
And you take students?
No, my full-time job is at the university. So between meetings and more meetings, I really have very little time to teach. No, I know. I do teach university students. I have the University Orchestra. I run the chamber music program. I am the chair of the performance area. And then at Mount Royal, I direct the Calgary Youth Orchestra. So yeah, so I don't teach students outside of the university.
And how long is the practice you will recommend
For
students who started for their first year?
Sort of depends, you know, how mature they are. You don't want them to hate the instrument. I think that's the main thing, you know, that you want them to sort of enjoy it. So maybe, you know, 15 minutes and then a break, another 15 minutes, another break, maybe another 15 minutes and another break. But, you know, I think if they start to hate the experience, then it's just not, the extra half hour is just not worth it.
Great. Well, you're obviously a very accomplished and busy man, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come here. So once again, Edmund, thank you so much for coming.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.